All right, I'm going to talk, we just talked about applying physics, right? So I'm going to go here and I'm going to select, and let's apply those rigid bodies to our objects, okay? And if I hit play, what's going to happen is it's going to fall, or both objects are going to fall, the cube and the sphere. And they're going to hit the ground, okay? Now, the reason why it maybe didn't look as natural as it could have been is the objects didn't bounce at all. Normally, unless your object is really, really dense, what's going to happen is an object will bounce. I mean, I kind of exaggerated a little bit there, but it would bounce a little bit. So that's why it didn't quite look as natural as it could have been. So how can we fix this? Well, we're going to create something called a physics material. Okay. Let me go in here and I'm going to hit create. And I don't, we're going to scroll all the way down to where it says physics material. Okay. And it kind of looks like a tennis ball hitting the ground. And I'm going to call this regular bounce. Okay. I don't really want to get into all these things about friction and whatnot. Friction has to do with like, if your object was flatter, it would slow down, it would bounce less than if it was like had less surface area. That also gets into like the type of material, like fuzz versus, that kind of stuff. The only thing I really want to talk about now is bounciness. And so bounciness is like whether the object bounces, and it can go from 0, which is no bounce, to 1, which is the total, highest amount of bounce. I'm going to set this to 0.5. Okay. And I want to apply this to my sphere. Now, the way that you apply a physical material in terms of how the object will respond to colliding with another object is I'm going to go under this thing called a collider. We're going to talk about colliders in the next video, and you're going to go to where it says material, and this is where you can set a physics material. So I'm going to take this and drag it into the physics material to where it says regular bounce. And let's compare that now. So the object on the left has the bounce, the object on the right doesn't. And you can see it bounced a little bit. Okay. Maybe I wanted to bounce a little bit higher, so I'm going to make a new physics material. And maybe we'll set the bounciness to 1. Okay. I'll call this high bounce. And I'm going to go select here and do the same thing. Let's go under box collide. We're going to go on the collider, and we're going to go under material and drop that in. And if I were to play, okay, you can see that it bounced. Okay, the other one bounced higher because we set the bounciness on it. So the result is this kind of makes this object look a little more elastic. Like, I got this kind of stretchy rubber here, or like a rubber band or something. So something like that would be bouncier than, say, steel. Okay, a big heavy piece of steel or bronze. Not to say it's not going to bounce at all, but it's definitely not going to bounce as high as like a rubber ball. Okay, there's a reason if you buy like one of those little rubber balls from a machine that it's like a very sort of like mixture of rubber together. Okay. Not only does the object having a material affect the bounciness, the other thing that actually affects it is the object that it hits, okay, which in this case is the ground, okay. So if your object also has a physics material applied, it actually amplifies the bounce. So for instance, if this has a bounce of regular bounce, which is like 0.5, I'm going to click on the ground here, go under its collider, and I'm going to apply the same thing to here. The result is that this is going to amplify or magnify this, and you're going to end up with a higher bounce. So if I play this, you can see that both objects bounce much, much higher. Okay. If I set this actually to 1, a high bounce with a high bounce for both the collider and the thing it's colliding with would actually cause it to bounce all the way off, or bounce all the way back to its original height, which is physically actually impossible. You can't normally do that in real life, because if you drop an object, it loses kinetic energy when it hits the ground through friction. But, you know, in this case, there's like, it's some magical world where there's no friction. And so it just constantly bounces all the way back to its normal height. Okay. So that is physics material. You may want to cause, you know, if an object is rubber, you may want it to bounce or something along those lines. Last thing I'm going to talk about today is the idea of a collider. Okay. So I got this scene here, and I got like a rowboat, and I got this kind of diamond shape, and I got this monkey. Okay. And I'm just going to hit play. And all of my objects are just going to hang there in space. Okay. And what I'm going to do is let's take this, and I'm going to apply a rigid body to it, which essentially applies gravity to it. Okay. Let's go back and let's watch what happens when you apply gravity to this object. Okay. Now, if you notice, the object literally falls through the floor like it's essentially, you know, like a ghost. Now, why does that happen? So, what does a rigid body do? Well, a rigid body takes an object that normally isn't affected by gravity or any physics and it applies gravity in this case. So it falls. Okay. What happens is normally your object, you know, I know we can see this object here, like we can view it, but the object is passing through this. Okay. Because we basically, you know, like the way to kind of explain it is like I have, you know, I was creating this here, right? And if I were to build another square, let me do this on the fly. I'm going to build a square that's, I don't know, 250, 50. You might wonder, well, why did that one square pass through the other? And the answer is objects don't defaultly collide with each other. Okay. You can kind of see this in programs like Blender, where it's like, well, I can have a cube and I can have another model that's literally intersecting it, right? That's not how things in real life work. If, you know, the reason why my hand stops here is it's colliding with my, you know, my fist here is colliding with my hand. If I try to pass this, you know, console through my hand, it's not going to work because it's got to, you know, pass, you know, it's colliding. It's essentially hitting a bunch of solids, which are essentially a bunch of molecules that are tightly packed and all that, and it can't get through. Okay. Now, that's not happening here. And the reason why is we need to apply what's called a collider. A collider means that this object will collide with other objects that also have a collider. Okay. So this ground actually has a collider, but these models don't. Okay. So what I'm going to do is go here and I'm going to apply another component called under physics, and that's going to be called a collider. I'm going to choose the first one, which is referred to as a box collider. And when I did that, it's a little hard to see, but I have this kind of, see that kind of green sort of, you know, wireframe I got there. That is the, you know, that is the collider going around my model. In this case, it's a robot. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I might want to edit the position of that collider. So what I can do is under your collider, there should be an option that says edit collider. I'm going to click on that. And then when you do that, you might notice that it's like you get these sort of squares, right? And what that allows me to do is to resize my collider as such. When I'm done, I can just click back on it. All right. I'm going to edit this a little so I can drag that guy forward. Okay. All right. Now that I've applied this, let's hit play. All right. There you go. So now it's colliding. My rowboat is colliding with the ground. Okay. Now, the thing about that you have to remember is it's not the mesh or the outside of the model that collides, it's the actual collider. Now, what I mean by that is I'm going to take this and I'm going to add a rigid body, which applies physics. If I were to hit play, what's going to happen is that object is going to fall. And because it doesn't have a collider, it should pass through the floor like the rowboat did. Okay, you can see that happening. What I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this and I'm going to add a rigid, a collider. Let's do another box collider for now. And you can see it added a collider that goes around it. You can see it there. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this collider so that it kind of goes longer than the actual model itself. Okay. And if we go and we play this, what you're going to see is that see how it doesn't actually hit the ground? Because what's actually hitting the ground here is not, what was hitting the ground was actually this part is colliding with this. So even though the model itself hasn't actually collided with the ground, it doesn't matter because it's not based on that. It's based on the collider. Okay, so just be aware of that. If you want two things to collide with each other, it's not based on the model itself. It doesn't. I could make this the collider bigger or smaller. In fact, if I took this and I edited this, oops, let's turn this off. I'm going to edit this collider. Let's say I did that. Once again, it's not based off the mesh, it's based on the collider. So if I were to hit play, it's going to fall. And you can see this time, it doesn't stop at the tip of that item. It goes all the way down so it hits the actual collider, which we can actually see here. See how that's going on? Okay. So when you set up your, your colliders, you should set them up, so that they go around where you want the actual part to hit. I'm just going to remove these for now, so they don't distract us. Last thing I'm going to do, let's go to this monkey. And once again, I'm going to add, let's add a rigid body. Okay. That's going to add gravity. It doesn't, my monkey currently doesn't have collider on it. So it's probably, or it should fall right through the floor, and it does. So what I'm going to do is go back and I'm going to apply a box collider. Okay. And it's actually applying like a really small collider there. So I'm actually going to take that and edit it, something like that. All right, let's try it now. And the result's going to be, it's going to hit the ground like the way that a box would, except it's not really a box, right? It doesn't quite feel as natural. So you actually have other types of colliders that we could use, not just the box collider. So other types of colliders, we have a capsule collider. The way a capsule collider would work. This one's not even doing that. There you go. I'm playing a capsule collider, and if I edit this, you can see that it's like I can grow it. I don't really think this is really kind of what I want here. I don't really want a capsule because it's not really a capsule shape, but just wanted to show you that you could. There's also a sphere collider, which is like the same idea, except it's a sphere rather than a. So if I edit this, I can make a sphere that's bigger or smaller. Okay. The last one, or the one I think you should probably consider, is when you have an awkward shape like this monkey and you want it to be a little more natural, what I would actually suggest doing is using what's called the mesh collider. What the mesh collider does is it's based off of the mesh of your item. So if I hit mesh, it actually uses the mesh of the model itself, the gray area. A lot of times it probably won't look like you did anything, but what I'm going to do is click convex and see how it kind of gets, it's almost like it's like wrapped in like like in plastic or something. Okay. So the reason why I like this one is this one's much more contoured. So it's not just a basic shape. And so now when I hit play, okay, see how it kind of, it's a little different. When a cube hits a flat surface, it doesn't really react very much, but something that's a little bit more of an awkward shape, it's going to bounce and rotate a little bit, right? So that's like a little bit more of a natural kind of bounce, you know what I mean? So this is why, you might want to use something like a uh, a mesh collider so that the collider is much more specific to the model or the mesh of the model itself. All right.